Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy today to welcome you to our Admin and Ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes, and we love getting guests on. And today we're doing a bit of a collab with some other podcasters who are in the area of comms. So Joe and Hannah, welcome to our podcast. Great to have you on.
Yay.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
It's great, and I'll tell you the name in a minute, and we'll get into kind of why you guys called your name Gourds and Pomegranates. Before I jump into our conversation today, let me just give a big shout out to Gavin at Church Suite and the team there who are kindly sponsoring our podcast and have just developed a brilliant software that serves church administrators and managers, people in comms all across the country, serving churches in the background. And we love their heart for local churches, and their technology is great. And if you've not come across them, then please have a look at churchsuite.com. Check out all the different modules. If you're looking for a church database, then it ticks boxes. If you're thinking about groups and managing groups, rotas, comms, this stuff is great. It's all in one place, and there's loads of resources to help you use it and training. So please go and check that out. And grateful for them for sponsoring us. Well, Joe and Hannah, it's great to have you on the podcast. You guys run your own podcast relating into church comms, Gourds and Pomegranates. Joe, tell me, this is such a great name. Where does this come from?
It's a great name until you come to SEO. It was one of those things of we were going, do you know, what can we call this? We know we want it to be about church comms, but does it necessarily need to be called the Church Comms Podcast or another Church Comms Podcast?
So that would have been a good name.
Probably. I mean, we sat in a cafe in Bournemouth, and I think it's probably the first time that we met in person, actually.
I think so, yeah.
And we kind of brainstormed, and for whatever reason, this is what came to me. It's I think I probably had to spend too much time persuading Hannah of it, if I'm honest, and I'm not sure I should have. It's based on 1 Kings 7. So you've got the temple there, the Solomon's building, and among the many instructions that God gives him, you have these really ornate gourds and pomegranates. And I'm sure there is loads of symbolism there that we're not aware of and don't need to go into. But this idea of like beauty and almost to a pointless extent beauty, on excellence, and how we can apply that to other areas of church life as well. So we might not spend thousands of pounds on bronze pomegranates to line the ceiling, but we do want to do things with excellence in our churches.
Yeah, that's
and I think
great.
also it's worth mentioning one of the other points that that was a big reflection for us in the Bible was Bezalel.
Okay.
And I think that the idea of, again, that comms is not very often thought of as a priority within churches and mission and ministry, yet it is actually it is really important. And the fact that this random guy gets mentioned in Exodus, they specifically say pick Bezalel because he's good at his craft. And he's the first, I think I'm right in saying he's the first person to have God's spirit put upon him in his means of worship. And so for us, it was as well kind of that of we're acknowledging that, okay, we're not preaching or kids work or worship. This is where our heart is, but actually this is really important as well. And this is where we feel God's spirit is moving within us. So we were kind of, random Old Testament references was very much the driver.
I like that. Well, Joe, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll come to Hannah and find out a bit about her. Fill our listeners in on what are you kind of involved in at the minute?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you might be able to see over my shoulder on my wall, I've got a sign for Be Gallant. So that is the name of my business. So that takes up the majority of my time. That is web design and branding. A lot of that is for churches. So I say that I work with churches, charities, and small businesses. Partly I put it in that order because it's a nice excuse to get people to be confused on networking. And they go, hang on, you say he works with churches? Like, no one else says that. And it's actually led to some really interesting conversations.
Good.
So there's that side of what I do. I then do a day and a half a week for our church as a church administrator. So that's something which is relatively more recent. I've been doing that for 4 months or so. And was really interesting starting that in October, going straight into the Christmas period.
Oh wow, yeah, that is a big deal.
Yeah. So those are the main things that I do. Obviously, I've got Gourds and Pomegranates. I've got another podcast called 5 Minute Business Friends, which has been really fun. And yeah, live down in Kent, go to Rochester Baptist Church, got 2 kids and a dog.
All right, happy days. Love that. Love that. What about you, Hannah? Tell us about you, what you're involved in.
Realizing I have it as well behind me, but my camera is back to front. So, well, mine is only because it was at a stand that I was on. I was like, can I keep it? It's got the business name on it. Have that behind me. Then it's back to front. Anyway, so
it's not back to front for us.
Oh, is it not? Oh,
No.
it is for me. Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool. So yeah, so I work for myself in a business called FH Digital, but to be honest, people just know me as I always just call myself, I'm a loiterer. I seem to like just hang around at a lot of churchy circles and be like, oh, have you got any work going? I, similarly to Joe, sort of churches, charities, but mine tend to be then sort of Christian businesses or Christian organizations. Just for me, I find that is where I can handle working in. So most of my work is around social media, and I do find it quite challenging, and I have a lot of, so it's not theological, but I suppose sociological and psychological and mental kind of concerns with the way that the internet is going and stuff. But at the same time, I think it is an amazing tool that we have to use of our churches, but also our responsibility as Christians of going out and sharing the gospel, and also of just the fact that, you know, suddenly we can access millions and millions of people from around the world and share the good news with them. Most of my work is actually, I can't even say most of my work. It really depends on what's going on and who I'm working with. It's around predominantly social media management, a lot of social media training and consultancy. I do a lot of training on things that are related. So it's not necessarily social media. So I've done a lot at the minute on Canva. I've done a lot of Canva training for churches. And specifically thinking, because there is a lot of stuff out there for small businesses or something, but to think about churches using it, there's a very different kind of like pivot as to thinking about how it's going to be used in the context and sort of actually what you need to be doing. And then I do a lot of kind of content creation in terms of do a lot of videos, so like home mission videos or good news stories and events, celebration events, as I try to think of sort of what have I done recently, concerts and stuff in churches, and I'll take pictures for that and stuff. So it's a bit of a sort of, it's not one specific thing, it really depends. And then I do some research and written consultancy and strategy stuff. So I'm also doing an MA in digital theology at Spurgeon's. Like I literally have weeks left of doing my writing, and so for me as well, as it's really interesting thinking. I have a lot of practical application, but how do we think theologically and biblically about how we use it and what are our responsibilities? I live on the south coast of Dorset, and I also have a dog, but no children, and a husband.
And you make videos about tea.
I haven't done that for a while, but well, my new thing now. So I do a lot of sea swimming more in the summer. I will occasionally go in the winter. But I recently got a drone for my birthday. So now I am, that's my personality now. It's sort of filming land, air and sea is my personality now. And that's all I'm really going to share online. So that's me.
My oldest son, Zach, he runs something called 400 Foot Media. And I think it was probably about 10 when we bought him the first drone. It was the most riskiest thing I've ever done, but he just had this kind of absolute passion to want to do it, and now he does it for a living and does estate agents, church stuff, and walkthroughs of big properties. And I mean, he loves it, and he does so much of my editing and stuff like that. So shout out to Zacho, who'd be listening to this, and he would love you guys, and he loves all that kind of media content creation. And we just had a new coffee shop in the church, and he's just been like, this is my happy place.
That's amazing. And that's something that like 10 years ago, I mean, I was working for a church about 10 years ago and making videos, and DSLRs were just starting to come in, so we actually finally had some good quality video. We couldn't really use phones back then, they weren't good enough. But like to think 10 years down the line of how much that's all come on, and like the fact you can have aerial photography in a church video is mind blowing. Like even 15 years ago, that would have cost you tens of thousands of pounds. It's mental. It's crazy, but it's brilliant, and we can use it all for the gospel.
It's great. It's great. So, Joe, you mentioned earlier that you guys, the first time you met. So, give me a little bit about the history of how you guys come together. You're in different parts of the country. You're doing obviously, complementary things together in this whole area.
Yeah.
How did you make this connection to go, right, let's do this podcast together?
Okay, so I'm gonna slightly throw someone under the bus here, but I can't remember who it is, so that's okay. We were at the virtual Premiere Digital event. So that was the conference that used to run, sadly doesn't anymore. And during COVID, they did it online in about October, November 2020. We both turned up to a networking breakout session, and a few other people turned up. There were sort of dribs and drabs coming in, but no one turned up to lead it.
Okay.
And kind of it was just everyone was just awkwardly sitting there. There's a few messages in the chat. I think Hannah and I maybe messaged each other in chat like, well, this is awkward,
I think as well we were the younger ones in the room.
Yeah,
Okay.
oh yeah,
I
there's
think as
definitely people
well.
there who just didn't really get networking. And like by this point, we're talking late 2020, 2020,
Yeah, it would have been.
I had done a lot of online networking in 2020, trust me. So I'm like, come on. So between us, we both kind of got it going a bit and got a discussion going and got people to introduce themselves. And that was the first time we met. Eventually, someone did turn up and kind of stopped all the discussion and said, right, we're doing this now. So yeah, it was online. Off the back of that, we sort of had a Zoom chat and said, you know what, we both really passionate about this. It'd be great to think about doing something together. And then it wasn't until we decided, yes, we're definitely going for the podcast, and to say we sat down to have coffee and decide the name, that we'd actually met in person. So I think it's probably a handful. It's definitely less than 10, maybe like 4 or 5 persons that we've times that we actually met up in person.
Bournemouth, London. Yeah, it was literally 4 times, I think.
Isn't it? That's crazy. And you guys are so natural and listening and enjoying your podcast is great. And
we've only like recorded 2 episodes. We had one morning where we recorded in the same place at the same time. And I don't know about you, Hannah, but I remember it feeling really weird, like recording in person.
I'm not used to like sitting at a table with someone. This is odd. I want a screen between us.
Yes, I love that. Now, one of the things I picked up from your podcast, which I love, is your heart to help churches, in what some might consider like the basic starts of social media, comms, and you guys have got a real heart to serve churches, and that comes through lovely. So tell us a little bit about what have you been doing to kind of help support churches, and what episodes can we go back and go, okay, somebody's listening to this going, I have to do a bit of comms. Where do I start?
I mean, our 50th episode would be a good place to start, to be honest. And that's not coming on my authority. That's coming on the recommendation of my mother. She went and listened to that 50th episode. Let's not talk about the other 49, why it took her so long. But what we did in that one is sort of really self-indulgently did a bit of a highlights, and like these are all our favorite points from the episodes, and these like the top 10 things and how it all ties together. So that's a really good starting point. In the first series, we started off by putting together a comms plan for churches, and so had 2 episodes together that were very step by step, and we have a handful of episodes which are more step by step like that. And then there are others which are either interviews and more conversational, or are just kind of looking at the why of something rather than the how. But yeah, obviously lots of different areas that we cover in doing that.
Yeah, great. Anything to add to that, Hannah?
No, I'm just looking at the list now. It was easier in the early days when we only had 10 to remember. Now I'm going, what ones have we done again? But yeah, I think I think for us, having been at things like Premier Digital and various other kind of like churchy commsy gatherings and even sort of just online networks and stuff, that there are people at our level, and that's cool. But generally, churches don't need to have, every church does not need to have everyone like not even saying that we're that good, but you don't need to have someone who's super into it.
Every church doesn't need a full-time communications team on 50 grand a year each. That's
not at all. But for us, and I think it was why we kind of decided to pitch it at this level, was we saw so many churches who weren't even like a few percent into it, or knew where to start, or how to kind of take it forward. And loads of people were thrown into stuff in the pandemic, and it was really lovely that they all were trying stuff. But most of them, that, you know, a lot of the ones that I was speaking to were like, I don't know what I'm doing, literally just like kind of going along with what everyone else is suggesting. But it worked then because you didn't have a lot of other day-to-day stuff doing. You know, the building management and going out and doing a lot of the things that ministers should be focused on within churches, because the honest reality of it is that it's mostly ministers doing the commsy stuff. So for us, we wanted to kind of pitch it at this level, because we thought that actually if everyone can, if the national UK churches can shift a bit in their knowledge, their interest and their understanding of digital, whether or not they're doing it, or whether they're suddenly going, okay, I understand its importance, how can I find someone within my church family, maybe a young person, to like come in and get involved and sort of volunteer, or perhaps we could end up paying them and stuff. That would help everyone. That would help the national global church better than if we worked with 3 mega churches in the UK and pushed them a little percentage forward, because actually they're already way ahead of everyone. So we wanted to kind of shift the majority of people.
It's like a 0 to 10 thing when there's already resources for the 10 to 100, and also just being UK focused. Like that's not to say we're not useful to people outside of the UK, but we care about the churches in the UK. And it's a very different atmosphere to America. I think one other thing to add to that as well, and it's something I've actually got the book to hand. I've been reading this recently, which is The Volunteer Effect by Jason Young and Jonathan Marm. Funnily enough, Jonathan Marm I follow on Instagram. That's the only reason that I know of him, and he talks about social media stuff. And he recommended his book recently. I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. Self-plug, I'll give that a read. When we're recruiting people, I think we stereotype too much. And so the classic one is we will only ask people to do the PA in a church who are a bit techie anyway. And actually, yes, there are technical aspects to the role, but there are also creative aspects. And probably the biggest and most important aspects are attention to detail and following instructions. And so if we can break out a little bit of that mold, and maybe it is the young person, but actually it doesn't need to be the person that we imagine who's like super good with computers. If we can say this stuff isn't as complicated as you think it is, but this is why it matters and why it makes a difference, then we can get different people and we can empower them to to share the gospel in different ways.
That's really good. Go on, Hannah.
I think a challenge as well for churches, and because I've experienced it, is that a lot of them, when saying about volunteers, of going, well, how do you fit into the box I need filling, because this is that, rather than, it's a bit of a conversation, but of going, well, what do you feel gifted in, or what do you want to do? Because maybe someone wants to try doing the PA, but they're not who you would have assumed to do it and stuff. And it's sort of really echoed in jobs that I had, or a job I had kind of pre and going into the pandemic, where I was involved in a Christian charity and was doing social justice stuff and was very vocal about my faith and, going out and sharing God's love and stuff. And I had a few people, and one of them was an archdeacon, and I had to be like, no. He was like, oh, have you ever thought about ordination? You're a very passionate young woman. You'd be great. And I'm sure he said it coming from a good place, but I was like, just because I'm young and passionate about God, I don't really feel called that way. Or people go, oh, you're a young woman, have you thought about youth ministry or something? I'm like, children scare me. No. And so I think there is this thing that anytime someone shows an interest in something, it's how do you fit into my expectations of the jobs that I need filling within church, rather than going, well, actually, how can we create something to help you bless through your giftings? And I think that's a challenge, that there's not that capacity to have that conversation and really kind of think forward, because churches are just trying to kind of like catch up or keep up with what we've been doing, with what we've been always doing. Kind of thing.
It's helpful. And I think, you're onto something there, which is the bigger issue that lies behind the scenes, isn't it? How do people value comms? And, we've had this for many, many years, as we start talking about church administration and leaders just undervaluing it, not looking for people with that kind of gifting, not looking at how they can like position them to be effective. And it's the same thing that I think that you guys have experienced in comms, that churches that undervalue it, or it's probably the last thing on the list, that if I get busy, I'll leave it because I haven't got the time to do it. And part of, our message for the church office is, how can we liberate leaders to be given themselves to the word and prayer, that we can build the right structures and get the right teams, and that whether that's paid or voluntary, it doesn't really matter. But it's about how can we get the different gifts that we have in our church to work effectively. And you're right, we have a glorious message, doesn't it? The gospel is life-changing message that we want to communicate, and how do we communicate that is so important. Do you guys have like a kind of tagline or a 3-step thing? You're thinking, right, what should we be communicating to the church? When's the right time? How do people want to receive this? Do you have sort of like a filtering system of like, okay, we need to tell the church about, I don't know, a weekend away, and we need to inspire them, and we want them to come on board for this weekend away? How do you approach communicating a message like that?
I mean, I'm well up for a weekend away. Like, I think we should be doing some.
I'm
sort
currently
of
promoting
thing.
a weekend away.
Oh, well, this is it. Yeah.
I don't know that in terms of like a mantra or anything, but what we do bang on about an awful lot is prioritization.
Yeah.
And the fact that if you're trying to say everything, then people are going to hear nothing.
Yeah.
That is very key with websites, and they are often a culprit for it. The classic one is that rotating slider, which no one looks at any of the slides. But in order to prioritize, you need to know who you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So for a weekend away, that's going to be very different, because you are communicating to your internal church audience, whatever you want to call that, congregation members, whatever. That probably isn't going to be the same audience as your website, which, depending on the church, it will be different, but primarily it's going to be outsider focused. So prioritizing there is going to be, hey, you're new here. You're really welcome. Jesus loves you. Or some sort of message like that. And here's how you get involved. Here's that next step.
Yeah.
And it might be that you want the weekend away, right beneath that, partly to capture your members and people who do go to the website, but also to show outsiders, for lack of a better word, like people who aren't in the church, what sort of church you are.
Yeah.
But I think, bringing it back to that internal, it also really applies to notices on a Sunday.
Yes,
and that's the thing where there's usually a list, and it's usually read out in a monotone. And maybe you do have PowerPoint for that. Like, maybe you do, but there's probably, like, chances are if you do, you've also got 10 other slides. Instead of saying, this is what we communicate this week. So this is something that for us as a church is a gradual thing, but we're just starting to zoom out a little bit more. We're starting to work that a little bit more in advance. So yes, we're doing sort of rotas and that sort of thing for 3 months ahead, but actually the calendar is going out for 6 months, maybe even a year ahead. There are things that we know are going to happen in December.
Yeah, that's
Let's
right.
not mention the C word, but we know roughly when the dates are going to be, right? Because we know that we're probably going to do the services on a Sunday, so we can put those in the calendar now. And that means that we know in advance of that how long we're going to need to promote it and work backwards. We had our sort of Christmas review meeting the other week, so I think it was 10th, 14th January, something like that. And that wasn't a meeting to make decisions about Christmas 2025, but it was just to start that process of reflecting so that we can then go forward and plan a little bit earlier. Not everything is going to have that level of organization going into it, but at least you can start to think that way. So Easter, we'll do some stuff, not as much as Christmas, so we need to be thinking about that and where we're going to be planning it. If we have any events between now and Easter, that we can plan there. So it's not necessarily like a 3-point plan, but I think it's just starting to have that attitude of, why are we doing these events? Who do we want to come to them? And therefore, what steps do we have to take to get that out to people?
Yeah. That's the kind of strategy, isn't it, that we need in this whole area, isn't it? I love that. What's our message? What do we want to communicate? Who are the people to communicate that? Even looking into the stats and thinking about the different demographics in our church, the message for the weekend away to somebody that's older and somebody that's younger is going to look different. And you're right. And the notices are coming into this as well. So how do we reach those groups of people with the right message at the right time in the right way? Is so useful. Hannah, what would you add into that?
Well, our unofficial is official because it's on the branding, sort of tagline is common sense for church comms. And I think like Joe's explained what common sense is. Because we're not suggesting that churches, get Photoshop and start, doing a 3-camera, smoke effects service or something like that. It's not about that. It's about going, use your common sense. What works for you? What have you got capacity to do? What should be your priority for the people around you and the people that you're trying to reach, and the things that you can do and are doing and want to do and stuff. So I think we're not trying to challenge people to a ridiculous level that they get off put. We're trying to inspire, but also going, actually, come on now, you can do better, because we should be doing better, because comms is not, I'm gonna put myself out of a job in a way. It's not as important as safeguarding and not having a leaky roof. But at the same time, well, actually, if you're not communicating with your congregation, with your people in your community, with the mission fields that you're trying to reach, whether that's geographical or online or whoever, well, if you're not communicating, they're not going to know, and so they're not going to come to stuff. And like, there's been occasions of events and things that I've attended or been involved in over the years, and you go, well, no wonder no one came, because we didn't actually
we didn't say anything,
put things out in the right places, or we didn't talk about it enough, so therefore people didn't know. Or I've been going, I didn't know that event was happening. Oh, that's a shame. And it's sort of like, well, actually it is needed to keep the wheels turning.
And it comes back to what do we mean by comms, or what do churches mean by comms anyway? And there are core things that we talk about. We talk about our own like direct areas of expertise with websites and social media. We talk about branding and design. And then you go a little bit wider, and there are other things that come under comms. And we like to think of that whole experience from someone arriving at the church in the car park, if you're lucky enough to have one, and through the door, and all of that as part of comms as well.
Do you have signposts for toilets?
Exactly. And these things get forgotten. But I mean, going back to that mantra, sometimes the most effective way of communicating something, and often the most effective way, is just talking to someone. And that might need a bit of strategy behind it. And not every church is going to be able to do that in the same way. That might be that you do it through small groups. But I have found that the most effective way always is to have a list of people in the church, tick off the people that you know are coming, like keep a record of that if you can, and then just assign people to actually go and ask. Because not only does that keep a conversation going, it is a very persuasive way of getting people to things. But if they say no, you can find out why. And maybe it isn't the comms strategy that needs to change, but it's the nature of the events that you're putting on, or the things that you're doing.
That's really helpful. And I think one of the things that we've probably learned in that journey is not just thinking about the comms leading up to an event or a Sunday morning, but also we were talking this Christmas, right? What's the next thing that we want people to go to?
Next step.
How do we communicate that at the event, or what does it look like after the event, to be able to move people into that next lane, to come forward? And that level of thought is like provoking us to go, okay, how do we do this better? And I think, to have that in mind as well. So the comm strategy is what you're talking about. It sounds fancy. It sounds like, all right, we've got to put, 10 hours of work into this, but it's actually just going, well, what have we got on, and how do we shift people through? What's the next evangelistic course that we want to communicate? What does that look like, and how are we going to do that better? And it does need a team approach, doesn't it, to get that. So everyone's on board. So it isn't just the poor comms person who gets the dates and, here's the blogs and here's what we want you to do, but actually the life of the church, how do we communicate that across the people? And that takes the leader, it takes maybe an office member, it takes someone in the voluntary groups and teams that we're running. I love that kind of team approach to this, and would encourage churches to think about that. Any other top tips, guys, that you think that are coming to mind that you're like, oh yeah, you should definitely have a think about that?
I mean, a big thing that we talk about is content repurposing, which sounds really scary, but the idea being you have ready-made content in front of you, whether that's through events that you've got going on, or the biggest one that churches have that not a lot of other businesses have You have a sermon every Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right there, whether you take that as text that you can share on social media, whether you take some photos which can accompany text or have graphic, whether you're using video as a whole video or cutting it up, whether you
Yes.
put it out as a podcast, whether you just use it as inspiration for other things.
Yeah.
Like immediately you've got a bulk of stuff there that you can use to create content.
Yeah.
And that is so much easier than starting with a blank piece of paper or, let's face it, a blank Excel spreadsheet and
Yes.
going, what do I put on Facebook this week?
Yeah.
So there's that. And I think paired with that, and this is one of my things, is do less better.
Yeah.
So one of
Yeah.
the most common questions we'll get asked is, what social media platforms should I be on? And they're kind of expecting, well, you should go on Instagram if you want to connect with, well, it used to be the kids, now it's middle-aged mums. Go on TikTok if it's not banned, if you can,
Yeah.
if you want to connect with the kids or whatever, realistically, what ones you want already?
Mhm.
Can you do those better? Can you do those the same with less work? And that's a start. And that might then free up capacity that you can be thinking about what else you want to do and why you want to do it.
Yeah.
But it's doing it well, doing it efficiently, and always remembering that why.
Yeah, that's helpful. Hannah, any other top tips from you?
Too many.
Where do you
Have
start?
someone to always take pictures, like
Yeah.
at stuff, and I say this as someone who does do the organizing of things, but also then I'm there as a, like, I go to my
Yes.
dad's coffee morning to take pictures of their events when they have like special occasions and stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized that there was one time where I ended up sort of not being in charge, but there weren't that many other volunteers, and suddenly I'm helping to serve lunch, and I was like, oh, I can't actually take the pictures now. So you have a designated person to take pictures, and that's not like it needs to be every occasion, but again, it's just helpful if then you're promoting the next event, the next coffee morning Christmas lunch thing. Actually, you've got pictures. You've got pictures from previous years to be able to use, rather than going, oh, we're going to have to use that same Unsplash image that all the other churches are using. And I think it's just good to have that kind of bank of photos. But then also, like, just keep on top of updating stuff of like, there was a church. Yes, it is a church, because I was talking about it the other day. It's a church website where they've still got Summer 24. Come and join us for Summer 24 stuff up. And I was like,
come on.
Right, it's and it's just sort of, and again on Facebook and stuff, people have got, or other social platforms. I saw some on Twitter. People have got pinned stuff from 23 of like, we're advertising for this job, and you're like, well, that's quite out of date and stuff, and different things. So I think it's just sort of keeping or pictures of when the minister had a brown beard rather than a slightly grey beard or something, and things, and you're just like, it would just keeping on top of stuff and updating like once a month or something is better than going, oh my goodness, we haven't updated anything for a year and now I've got to go through everything. I think that's like, little and often is easier and less overwhelming than
it's good, isn't it? Yeah. And I think if you're a church listening to this and you're thinking, right, I'm responsible for this, or I'm going to try and find someone, actually just initially, just the opportunity to pause, take a bit of an audit of like, what has the church already got? Like, what are the dates? What are we up to date? What are the things that we have running? And then begin to start to make a plan, because it can feel kind of overwhelming. Kind of, you're talking about comms includes like walk-ins to church, notices, your website, your social media, your main messages that you're sending out, newsletters maybe to members. You can feel something like, oh my goodness, how are we going to take this on? But a pause, a little bit of an audit, a little bit of thought.
And if I could add one more, it's ask for help. And that's not me saying, hey, come and inquire about a new website. Honestly, if you don't need a new website, I'm not going to try and sell you one. But that might be the approach, just to get a contractor. But I'm talking about, there are lots of people out there in other churches who run podcasts who are more than happy to help and give advice. Things like spotting a pinned tweet from 2023. If you just log on and schedule it every week or put out your tweet and you're not going to notice it, it's just having that objectivity. And one of my favorite episodes, one of our most listened to episodes, was a case study for a church in the Midlands.
Yeah.
And they kind of gave us free reign, and like fair play to them, because it was a bit brave. They sent us over pictures of all the publicity laid out in the entrances. We looked at their website, we looked at their social media, we looked at everything. And hopefully we did it in a friendly enough way of saying, you guys are doing really great, but here are these things which you probably won't ever have noticed on your own because you're too close to it, that would take what you're doing already and just amplify it. It's not about doing something completely new or something completely different, but it's just having that help to spot where you can optimize things.
That's a really good point. And you think about sort of Exodus 18 with Jethro's leadership advice to Moses. It's from outside. It's a perspective that he's not seeing himself, and it comes with help. And the result is the people go to their place in peace. And there's this actual fruit that comes. And I think an outside perspective on comms, on the website, on what we're talking about is super helpful. So
hey, if you want to be a case study and be a guinea pig for another one, then get in touch. We'll do it.
A popular podcast. I think it is right. Now, let me ask you a bigger question then, and this is something that comes in a lot from the church office when we talk about comms with people, is some church leaders struggle with the idea of self-promotion, or that feeling of, as we do this comms work, we're kind of promoting ourselves and we're making ourselves look good or better than we are. And that makes people feel a bit uncomfortable, which means then it sort of paralyzes them from actually doing anything. Have you guys come across that question, or how would you be advising somebody who's maybe thinking that? Who wants a shot on this?
I guess I haven't. I don't think I've experienced it quite like that necessarily. The concerns I have normally are sort of like, I've said, well, actually, no, you really should be, as church leader, you should be an admin on the Facebook page, just from a
continuity
systems systems access. So don't let just one person be administrator of a Facebook page. And he was like, oh, I don't want to be on Facebook. I'm like, you literally don't have to do anything. It's just so that you can access it. But I don't want people to see any pictures of me. Well, they're not going to see any pictures of you if you don't post any pictures. And his was more, I suppose, a digital security and safety point. And I was like, people are only going to see what you put out there. If you want a completely closed account, and I think he has it, but he doesn't post absolutely nothing on it, fine. And that's cool. But there were kind of panics from you say you have to be on social media, and there's suddenly this sort of assumption of the extreme of what goes on social and stuff. But I have to say,
there's churches versus pastors and individual leaders as well being on there, and that's two different questions.
But I know I don't think I've had it in that way that you've just asked of people concerned about that. I suppose it's more that it's not that they're worried about them putting themselves out there, but just oh, we only had 4 people turn up to this thing. But 4 people, that's amazing to come along for a coffee, a drop-in thing. That's amazing. Not everything has to be a packed house, because that's stressful and that's overwhelming.
And that highlights what you said about photography as well, that actually one good photo of 2 people can be as good as a photo of a full packed out room. There might be some people who would be put off by the packed out room. So I mean, I don't think I've had it put as explicitly as that about promoting ourselves. Maybe I wish we had it more, because there's some self-reflection that you need to get to that point. But what I have had is that, are we being honest in our promotions? And again, that's case good. Of, if you're taking a stock photo to promote your coffee morning and it does look like there are 100 people there and there are 4 people there, then that's a very different thing. Equally, you probably don't want to just post that photo of an almost empty room. And so we need to find a middle ground there. And it's that doing it with integrity, but also being just slightly aspirational. So you want to show people, this is the kind of church we are, this is what we aspire to be. and some churches aren't even comfortable with this, and that's okay. You need to make the decision for yourselves. But I will often encourage people to take photos when they know the church is going to be fuller.
Yeah.
For example, like a baptism service or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, occasionally you get the response of, but like people are going to turn up and those people aren't going to be there.
Yeah.
I think you're overthinking it. Like
Yeah.
people aren't going to go, oh, I saw those on the website, but they're not here this morning. So this church is lying
Yeah.
to me. I think there's an expectation that you're not just going to post an empty room.
Yeah.
Although I had the sort of opposite of that of a church I was working with in the pandemic. And I was looking on the website and they had a stock image of, bless them, literally the diversity tick box of everyone. And they were all like arms around each other. And it was a cute stock photo, but I knew it was a stock photo.
We've all seen it. It's probably from Unsplash.
No, I'm pretty sure it's been on the website for many years. And I sort of went, but I know what the area's like. It's quite a specific demographic. And ethnicity.
Did we do an episode on stock photography? Like I've definitely written a blog post on it.
I do find it interesting, and I sort of was like, can't you just like take one and then, like, it doesn't matter if there's like, it doesn't matter, but at least it's honestly you guys. Whereas I'm looking at that going, oh, cool. I might see these sorts of people here. Whereas then we had it at my church where they literally did go, can I have you, and you? And
group photo
diversity tick box, which was a bit awkward, but at the same time, we genuinely were people who were at the church. Yeah. So I think, it was a bit kind of icky doing it, but at least it was like you could see, if you came to church, you would see me there.
Yeah.
As opposed to, bless them, their one, I was like, they are all far too young to be coming to this church. I know they don't come here.
I think it's the thing of context as well. So like I can't overstate the importance of getting a professional photographer from time to time. Like if you're reading your website and you want it to look modern, then you're going to need photos, and you want the photos on your website to be done well. And that can be the difference, when it is just two people chatting, but they've got a nice blurred background and all of that. That doesn't mean that you have to do it for every event, obviously. But it's also context in terms of like photos can connect with people because people connect with people and people's stories connect. So you can have that kind of slightly awkward staged photo of people smiling and but if it's accompanying a story of those people and explaining who they are and why the church matters to them, that's going to collect a lot more than, oh, okay, they're just trying to show that there's young people at the church.
Yeah. It does. It's useful, and these are all the things you have to think about. And I think that the heart of that question really is why do we do what we do, and what are we wanting to communicate? And again, different people have different views on what that looks like, and so collectively, are the leadership clear on what comms looks like? Are the comms team clear on how we want to present the different messages that we need to present? And I think that's the bit maybe that gets, we need time to pause. Let's talk about these things before we get into some of the action. And maybe if you're in that stage, then an audit, then some time to think, a time to hear the minister's thoughts or the pastor's thoughts on what they're thinking. And you're right, the context then is really important, isn't it? Who are we trying to reach in the community, if that's what that particular message is that we need to present? So this is good stuff. And I know you've got stacks and stacks of good content on the podcast. Let me encourage people to go to the different platforms that you use for podcasts, type in Gourds and Pomegranates. They will come up first time straight away, and check out what these guys are doing. And I know for many church administrators that I'm interacting with, comms becomes part of our roles day to day, until maybe the budget grows and there's an ability to bring somebody on. But again, the advice that we're hearing today is that, look at all the different gifts in the church. How can we find people with that gifting? How can we deploy people in that gifting? How can we support people in that gifting? And just review some of the stuff that we're doing. So thank you both for coming on. It's great to have you here. Hannah, we had the whole conversation without talking about biscuits, which I hear you're very passionate about. What is your favorite biscuit? Because maybe our listeners will be really keen to know that.
Well, it's only because it's the icebreaker of one of the icebreakers of our when we have the interviews and stuff. And I just find it very interesting when people like, oh, I really love a custard cream. And I'm like, of all of the things out there, why would you pick that? I think generally probably
chocolate covered custard creams, though.
Oh no, chocolate hobnob. I think that's like the best all-rounder for me.
I think that's probably what most people have picked.
And I think that's what most
average,
people
yeah.
have picked, yeah. But there's always there was always the running joke at the church I used to go to when, like, there's always a fight for the nice biscuits.
Yeah.
And you feel really bad as like the first person there of like, oh, I can't pick the last like really nice cookie kind of, I won't do that then. But there's always this running joke that the Viscounts, so like the minty wrapped ones, they're like, oh, the bishop's coming if we've got the Viscounts out. There's always a sort of like level of of justified hospitality with biscuits.
The quality of biscuits matter depending on who's coming and what's happening.
Yeah.
I love that.
So chocolate hobnob probably is the best.
It's great for a dip, isn't it, in a cup of tea or something? That is the reality. So
I mean, of course, the most important question that we ask, I guess, is gourd or pomegranate, but jury's still out on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on podcast. It's great to meet you. It's great to spend some time together. Love what you guys are doing, serving churches I love the common sense idea that just rings for me. So keep up the good work and let's keep in touch and how we can work together more effectively. I love that. Thank you for listening today to the podcast. If there's any way that we can serve you or connect with you in some way in your behind the scenes ministry, then please give us a shout at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to find out, give us some ideas of topics. Tell us things that you'd love us to chat about more. We'd love to hear your input and make this podcast as good as we can. All right. Well, we'll see you again on the podcast. Thanks for listening.